11 years ago, Sarah Kane and her 8-year-old daughter Emily vanished without a trace during a routine hike in the Grand Canyon, leaving behind 15-year-old Michael, who couldn't join them that fateful day due to illness. Years of fruitless searching transformed the once promising teenager into a grim, obsessed private investigator whose sole purpose became finding any clues about his missing family, even when everyone else, including his father, had long accepted their loss. In a remote corner of the Arizona desert, where even the most thorough search parties never ventured, Michael finally discovers their dust-covered car with untouched backpacks and a map marking a mysterious location 20 miles off-road, a key to the secret that impenetrable cliffs and powerful people have concealed for 11 years. Following this final lead, Michael uncovers the shocking truth about a hidden facility deep within the canyons, where his mother and sister might have become not just victims of misfortune, but prisoners of those who would go to any length to keep their secret hidden. And now he must risk everything to bring his family home. Before we begin, write in the comments where you're listening to our stories from. Subscribe to our channel, it's free and you can always change your mind. Enjoy the story. The sun was merciless the day Michael Kane found his mother's car. 11 years of searching had culminated in this moment. Standing in the scorching Arizona desert, staring at the faded blue Chevrolet partially buried in sand. The vehicle that had vanished along with his mother Sarah and 8-year-old sister Emily during what should have been a routine weekend hike in the Grand Canyon. His hands trembled as he approached. How many times had he imagined this moment? How many nights had he dreamed of finding them, only to wake up alone in his apartment with nothing but case files and maps scattered across the floor? When he pulled open the driver's side door, the creak of rusted hinges sent a chill down his spine, despite the 103-degree heat. Everything was preserved inside like a time capsule. Untouched backpacks, a Nikon camera with undeveloped film, his mother's hiking journal, and Emily's favorite stuffed rabbit, the one she'd refused to sleep without since she was 3. But it was the map on the dashboard that made his breath catch. Circled in his mother's distinctive handwriting was a location 20 miles deeper into the desert, marked with 2 cryptic words, Whisper Cave. What had drawn them there? And why had no search party ever found this car, despite the massive manhunt that followed their disappearance? Michael reached into the glove compartment and found something that shouldn't exist, a journal entry dated 10 years after they'd gone missing. Written in his mother's handwriting, Michael Kane had been 15 when they disappeared, old enough to remember every detail of that morning. The way his mother had kissed his forehead as he lay half asleep, complaining of a flu that prevented him from joining their hike. The sound of Emily's excited chatter about finding fairy pools in the canyon. The slam of the car door and the crunch of tires on gravel fading into silence. And then, nothing. No calls. No texts. No trace. Now at 26, Michael was a different person. College dropout. Former search and rescue volunteer. Current private investigator specializing in missing persons cases. His life had become an obsession with finding answers, fueled by the complete failure of the official investigation. The search that had started with hundreds of volunteers had dwindled to just him, tracking down every rumor, every reported sighting, every inconsistency in the case files. That persistence had finally led him here, to this remote stretch of desert 30 miles from where any logical search pattern would have extended. A tip from a dying Navajo elder who claimed to have seen a blue car heading into restricted land a decade ago, land that belonged to neither the government nor the reservation, but some shadowy private research company. Michael wiped sweat from his eyes and opened the journal with trembling hands. The pages felt brittle, sun-damaged, but the handwriting was unmistakable. The distinctive way his mother crossed her T's and curved her Y's. June 17, 2024. We've been here for what feels like months, though it's impossible to be sure. Emily says it's only been weeks. The cave system extends farther than we could have imagined. The symbols on the wall seem to respond to our presence. Strange lights appear at night. I'm leaving this note in the car in case we don't return from our last expedition. If anyone finds this, we've gone to the coordinates marked on the map. The cave entrance is hidden between twin mesas. Follow the petroglyphs and bring water. So much water. Michael checked the date again. 2024, 10 years after they vanished. Impossible. His throat tightened as he flipped through more pages, finding entries that spanned years, describing discoveries that sounded like madness, caves that whispered, crystals that distorted time, ancient symbols that changed when no one was looking. Had his mother lost her mind out here in the desert heat? Or had something truly inexplicable happened? He packed the journal into his backpack alongside his GPS, satellite phone, and 3 gallons of water. The PI part of his brain methodically photographed everything in the car before touching it further. Whatever had happened, he now had physical evidence. The first real lead in 11 years. As he was about to close the car door, something caught his eye. A child's drawing wedged under the passenger seat. He pulled it out carefully and felt his heart stutter. It was a crayon drawing of 3 stick figures. A woman with long brown hair, a small girl with pigtails, and a taller figure with what looked like a police badge. Written above them in a child's messy scrawl, "Mommy, me, and Michael when he finds us." The paper was crisp, the crayon marks bright and unfaded by time. Michael sank to his knees in the scalding sand, the drawing clutched in his hand. Could Emily somehow know he had become a private investigator? That he would find the car today? His satellite phone rang, startling him. The screen showed his partner's number. Diana Chen, the only person from the Phoenix PI firm who still believed in his search. "Tell me you're not in the restricted zone," she said before he could speak. "How did you know where I am?" "Your GPS tracker is still active, genius. You need to get out of there now. I just got a call from a contact at the Navajo Nation Police. Whatever's out there in that section of desert has them spooked. They're warning people away. Something about hikers disappearing over the years." Michael looked at the map again, at the circled location. I found my mom's car." The silence on the other end lasted several seconds. "Are you serious? After all this time?" And something else. Journal entries dated years after they vanished. Recent drawings from Emily. "It doesn't make sense, but Michael, listen to me. 3 research scientists went missing in that area last month. Some private outfit doing geological surveys. The authorities are keeping it quiet, but my contact says it's not the first time. People have been disappearing near those caves for decades." Michael stood, scanning the horizon. In the distance, he could make out twin mesas rising from the desert floor like sentinels. The same caves my mother was writing about. "Please tell me you're coming back to Phoenix so we can take this to the FBI. I can't die. Not when I'm this close. At least wait for me. I can be there by sundown with better equipment." Michael checked his watch. 4 hours until darkness. The coordinates were a 3-hour hike from his current position. "I'll wait," he lied. "Promise me, Michael." "I promise." He ended the call, knowing Diana would recognize the lie immediately. She knew him too well, knew that nothing would stop him now. He gathered his gear, locked the car that had been missing for 11 years, and headed toward the Twin Mesas. The sun beat down on his back as the desert stretched endlessly before him. Somewhere out there were answers. Somewhere out there, impossibly, his mother and sister might still be alive. And as he walked, he could have sworn he heard a whisper carried on the hot desert breeze. "Find us, Michael. Find us before they do." Diana Chen's 4th call went straight to voicemail. She slammed her hand against the steering wheel of her SUV as she sped down the highway toward the desert coordinates. Michael's GPS tracker hadn't moved in over an hour, which meant one of 2 things. Either he'd ditched the tracker to prevent her from following, or something had happened to him. Neither option brought her comfort. Her bureau contact had been explicit. That section of the Arizona desert had a disappearance rate 3 times higher than the surrounding areas. The official explanations ranged from heat exposure to flash floods, but Diana had spent enough time working cases with Michael to know when authorities were constructing convenient narratives. She glanced at the file folder on the passenger seat, copies of the Kane disappearance case she'd secretly pulled from county archives. 11 years of dead ends and contradictions. Search parties that somehow missed a bright blue Chevrolet in open desert. Rangers who insisted they checked areas their logs never recorded them entering. Witness testimonies that vanished from official records. If Michael had really found the car today, they were dealing with something far more complex than a hiking accident. 20 miles away, Michael was beginning to regret his impulsive decision. The desert terrain had proven more challenging than anticipated, with unstable slopes of scree and hidden sinkholes slowing his progress. The Twin Mesas that had seemed so close were still a good hour's hike away, and his water supply was dwindling faster than planned. But he couldn't turn back. Not with Emily's drawing burning a hole in his pocket. He paused at the crest of a small ridge, checking his GPS against his mother's coordinates. The device occasionally glitched, displaying what looked like interference patterns before returning to normal. Something he'd never seen it do before. "Just hold together until I get there," he muttered, tapping the screen. When he looked up, he nearly stumbled backward. Standing not 50 yards ahead was a coyote, but unlike any he'd seen before. Its coat was silvery white, almost luminescent in the late afternoon sun, and its eyes were a startling blue that seemed to glow from within. Michael froze, remembering the wilderness training from his search and rescue days. Coyotes rarely approached humans, but rabies or extreme hunger could make them unpredictable. The animal tilted its head, regarding him with an intelligence that sent shivers down his spine. Then, defying all expected behavior, it turned and trotted a few yards toward the mesas before stopping to look back at him. Waiting, Michael swallowed hard. His mother's journal had mentioned strange animal behavior near the caves, creatures that seemed to be guiding or following them. The coyote yipped once, a sharp, insistent sound, and continued forward, again stopping to look back. "This is insane," Michael whispered to himself, but found his feet moving forward anyway. The animal kept a consistent distance, leading him along a path he wouldn't have chosen, one that skirted the worst of the unstable terrain he'd been struggling with. They continued this way for nearly 40 minutes, until the base of the twin mesas loomed before them. The coyote led him to a narrow passage between the towering rock formations, and then, with one final glance of those two intelligent blue eyes, darted into the shadows and disappeared. Michael stood at the entrance to the passage, feeling suddenly intensely observed. Not by the coyote, by something else. Something that waited in the deepening shadows between the mesas. His satellite phone buzzed with a text from Diana. Tracker stopped. "Where are you? Sending coordinates to rescue if no response in 10. He quickly replied, "At mesas." Following lead. "I'm fine," and then turned off the device to save battery. Diana would be furious, but he couldn't risk distractions now. The passage between the mesas was cool after the brutal heat of open desert, the high walls providing blessed shade. As his eyes adjusted to the dimmer light, Michael began to notice markings on the sandstone walls, petroglyphs similar to those found throughout the Southwest, but with subtle differences. These symbols seemed newer, their edges sharper, and they depicted figures and shapes he didn't recognize from any Native American tradition he'd studied. And they seemed to be changing. Michael blinked hard, certain his eyes were playing tricks on him. But when he looked again, focusing intently on one particular spiral pattern, he could have sworn the lines shifted slightly, rearranging themselves before settling back into their original configuration. He reached out a tentative hand to touch the marking. The stone felt strangely warm beneath his fingertips, almost vibrating with a subtle energy. "What the hell is this place?" he whispered. His voice echoed strangely in the narrow passage, coming back to him distorted, as if repeated by multiple unseen speakers. "What is this place?" "This place. As the echoes faded, another sound replaced them, a soft, rhythmic whisper that seemed to come from deeper within the passage, words just below the threshold of comprehension, spoken in multiple overlapping voices. Michael pressed forward, drawn by the whispers and the increasingly elaborate symbols on the walls. The passage began to slope downward, the temperature dropping noticeably with each step. The afternoon sunlight barely penetrated this far, and Michael pulled out his flashlight, sweeping its beam across the increasingly narrow walls. The circle of light caught something reflective ahead, a smooth, glassy surface where there should have been only stone. As he drew closer, Michael realized he was looking at a formation utterly unlike the surrounding sandstone. It resembled obsidian, but was shot through with veins of blue-white crystal that pulsed with a faint internal light. And embedded within this strange formation was what appeared to be a door, a perfectly rectangular outline with symbols arranged around it in concentric circles. The whispering grew louder as Michael approached the door, resolving into words that somehow reached him partly through his ears and partly directly in his mind. "The way is opened by blood of blood. Time curves where worlds meet. Find the key in memory." Michael pressed his palm against the door's surface. Unlike the warm petroglyphs, this material was ice cold, sending a shock through his system. He jerked his hand back, surprised to see a small cut on his palm where a sharp edge had sliced his skin. A drop of blood fell onto the door's surface. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the crystalline veins in the obsidian-like material flared blindingly bright, causing Michael to shield his eyes. When he looked again, the door had changed. Where there had been solid stone was now an opening, beyond which lay darkness and the source of the whispers. Before he could step through, his flashlight caught movement within the darkness, a small figure darting away from the entrance. "Hello?" Michael called, his voice shaking slightly. "Is someone there?" No response came, but the whispering intensified, now accompanied by a cool breeze flowing from the opening. The air carried a strange scent, not the musty odor of a cave, but something fresher, like rain on distant mountains. Michael double-checked his gear, tightened the straps on his backpack, and took a deep breath. Every instinct honed from years of search and rescue work warned him not to enter an unexplored cave alone. But those same years had been spent searching for the very people who might lie beyond this threshold. He stepped through the doorway. Inside, the darkness was not complete. The walls themselves provided illumination. The same crystalline veins he'd seen outside ran through the interior like circuits, emitting a soft blue-white glow that allowed him to see without his flashlight. The passage continued downward at a steeper angle, opening into what appeared to be a vast chamber. As he descended, Michael became aware of a low humming that seemed to resonate with the crystalline light. The hum pulsed in time with the light, creating a synchrony that he could feel in his bones. The chamber at the bottom of the passage was enormous, far larger than seemed possible given the external dimensions of the mesas. Its ceiling soared at least 100 feet overhead, supported by columns of the same crystalline material. Pools of water dotted the floor, their surfaces perfectly still, reflecting the pulsing light from above. But what drew Michael's attention were the walls, every inch covered in intricate symbols, diagrams, and what appeared to be star charts. They reminded him of his mother's work. Sarah Kane had been an archaeologist specializing in ancient writing systems before she disappeared. He approached one section of wall where the symbols seemed particularly dense. Among them, he recognized his mother's handwriting, notes scratched directly onto the stone surface, translating and interpreting the symbols around them. Convergence point, one note read. Time flows differently here. Multiple realities. Another note in a different part of the chamber. Emily says she can hear them speaking. The symbols change when she's near. Michael's heart raced. This was real evidence. His mother's handwriting, continuation of her research. They had been here, in this impossible place. Recently, a sound behind him made him spin around, a splash from one of the still pools. He approached cautiously, flashlight beam playing across the water's surface. The reflection that greeted him wasn't his own. It was Emily's face, not as the 8-year-old girl who had disappeared, but older, a teenager now, looking up at him from beneath the water as if it were a window to somewhere else. Her eyes widened upon seeing him, her mouth forming his name in silent shock. Michael dropped to his knees beside the pool, reaching toward the surface. Emily? Emily, can you hear me? As his fingers touched the water, the image rippled and vanished, replaced by his own stunned reflection. He plunged his hand into the pool, finding nothing but cool water of normal depth. No, he shouted, disturbing the perfect stillness of the chamber. Come back, his voice echoed, multiplying and distorting as it had in the passage above, but this time resolving into a clear response. Not ready, paths not aligned. Find the anchor point. Michael scrambled to his feet, turning in circles, trying to locate the source of the voice. What? Where are you? How do I find you? No answer came, but one of the pools across the chamber began to glow more intensely than the others. Michael hurried toward it, hope surging through him. This pool was different, its water cloudy with swirling sediment that glowed with the same blue-white light as the crystals. As he watched, the sediment began to coalesce, forming patterns that matched some of the symbols on the walls. A map. Michael quickly pulled out his mother's journal, flipping to the last few entries. There, a sketch that matched what he was seeing form in the glowing pool. His mother had mapped these caves, or at least had begun to, and if he could follow her path, the sound of shifting stone echoed from the passage behind him. Michael turned, alarmed, as pebbles clattered down from above. Someone was entering the cave. Diana? He called hopefully, though he knew she couldn't have reached the mesas this quickly. No response came, but the quality of the light changed subtly, the blue-white glow dimming, replaced by harsher beams of artificial light sweeping the chamber. Flashlights, multiple beams. Michael quickly doused his own light and pressed himself against the wall beside one of the columns, heart hammering in his chest. The voices that now echoed in the passage were unfamiliar, clipped, professional, using terminology he didn't understand. Temporal anomaly increasing. We need to secure the anchor point. Subject Sigma's readings are off the charts. They've been here recently. What about the tracker we picked up? Could be the brother. Control wants him brought in for questioning. Michael's blood ran cold. These people knew who he was, knew about his family. and spoke about them like test subjects. As silently as possible, he edged deeper into the chamber, away from the approaching lights. The pools that had been so still now rippled with disturbance, their surfaces clouding as if deliberately hiding what lay beneath. The glowing map in the sediment pool began to fade, but not before Michael committed its essential details to memory. A pathway leading deeper into the cave system, toward what his mother's notes had labeled the convergence point. He needed to move, to find another exit before the searchers entered the main chamber. His gaze darted around the vast space, finally settling on a narrow fissure in the far wall, barely visible in the dimming crystalline light. Without hesitation, Michael slipped through the opening, finding himself in a much narrower passage that curved sharply downward. He switched his flashlight to its dimmest setting, providing just enough illumination to avoid stumbling as he descended deeper into the earth. Behind him, voices echoed in the main chamber, growing more urgent. "The readings are spiking again. Someone else is here. Spread out. Find them." Michael increased his pace, no longer concerned with stealth, only with putting distance between himself and his pursuers. The passage twisted and branched, and he made choices based on instinct and fragments of the map he'd memorized, hoping desperately he wasn't trapping himself in this labyrinth. After what felt like hours of flight, the sound of pursuit finally faded. Michael allowed himself to slow, catching his breath in a small alcove where the crystalline veins in the walls pulsed slower, dimmer. He pulled out his satellite phone, unsurprised to find no signal this deep underground. No way to contact Diana, no way to call for help. He was completely alone in this impossible place, pursued by unknown forces, following the ghost of his family. As his breathing steadied, Michael became aware of a new sound, a steady dripping of water somewhere nearby. He followed it, hoping for his source to replenish his dwindling supply. The passage opened into a smaller chamber dominated by a pool larger than those above. This water was clear, fed by a steady drip from crystalline formations overhead. Michael approached, prepared to refill his water bottle. But as he neared the pool's edge, the surface began to change, not rippling as the others had done, but transforming, becoming reflective like a mirror. And in that reflection, Michael saw not himself, but a room he didn't recognize. Some kind of laboratory filled with equipment, both familiar and utterly alien. And standing in the center of that room, staring up at him with the same shock he felt, was his mother. She looked older, her once dark hair now streaked with gray, but her face was instantly recognizable. She wore what appeared to be a lab coat covered in strange symbols similar to those on the cave walls. Her lips moved, forming words he couldn't hear. Michael leaned closer to the pool's surface, straining to understand. The water's surface suddenly bulged upward, a hand emerging from the impossible reflection, his mother's hand reaching toward him. Michael didn't hesitate. He grabbed it. The contact was electric, a shock that ran through his entire body. His mother's grip was strong, desperate, pulling him forward with unexpected force. For a terrifying moment, Michael felt himself falling, being drawn into the pool, not to drown but to pass through, as if the water were a gateway. Then another hand caught his shoulder from behind, yanking him backward with equal force. The connection broke, his mother's hand slipping from his grasp as he was pulled away from the pool's edge. Michael crashed to the ground, rolling to face his attacker, ready to fight. But the face that looked down at him wasn't one of the mysterious pursuers. It was Emily's. Not the child who had disappeared, and not quite the teenage reflection he'd seen earlier. This Emily appeared to be about 14, her hair cut short, her eyes wide with panic. She wore clothes that seemed cobbled together from disparate sources, a too large flannel shirt over what looked like medical scrubs. "Are you crazy?" she hissed, pulling him further from the pool. "You can't cross through an unaligned gateway. It'll tear you apart." Michael stared, unable to process what he was seeing. "Emily, is that really you?" Her face softened momentarily, tears welling in eyes that were unmistakably his sister's. "It's me, Mike. But we can't do this here. They're coming and Mom's trying to hold them off on the other side, but the alignment is already failing." The pool's surface was indeed changing, the laboratory scene wavering, distorting, his mother's figure becoming indistinct. "I don't understand," Michael said, his voice breaking. "Where have you been?" How are you here?" "How are you?" "Older." Emily pulled him to his feet with surprising strength. "Time works differently here, especially near the convergence points. It's been 3 years for me, not 11. But I can't explain everything now. We need to move." As if to emphasize her point, a shout echoed from the passage Michael had followed. His pursuers had found his trail again. Emily grabbed his hand, pulling him toward a crevice in the far wall that he hadn't noticed before. "This way. I've been mapping these tunnels for months while Mom works on the science. There's a safe place where we can talk, but we have to hurry." Michael allowed himself to be led, mind reeling with questions but survival instinct taking precedence. As they slipped into the narrow crevice, the last thing he saw was the pool's surface returning to normal water, the connection to his mother lost. "For now, keep your voice down," Emily whispered, leading Michael through a maze of increasingly narrow passages. "Sound carries strangely here, sometimes across timelines." Michael tried to process what was happening. His sister, 3 years older than when she'd vanished, not 11, moved with the confidence of someone intimately familiar with this underground labyrinth. Her flashlight beam revealed more of the strange, crystalline veins running through the rock, pulsing dimmer as they descended deeper. "Emily," he whispered, struggling to keep his emotions in check, "I've been searching for you and Mom for 11 years. She glanced back, her expression a complex mixture of sadness and determination. "I know. We've been searching for a way back to you, too. But it's complicated." "Complicated how? Who were those people back there? What is this place?" Emily held up her hand for silence as they reached a junction where 3 tunnels diverged. She stood perfectly still, head tilted as if listening to something Michael couldn't hear. After a moment, she chose the rightmost passage. "Quantum echoes," she explained, seeing his confusion. "You can hear disturbances in the field if you know what to listen for. They're moving away from us, but they'll sweep back this way once they realize they've lost our trail." The casual way she discussed concepts that belonged in science fiction documentaries left Michael reeling. This was his little sister, the girl who'd been learning multiplication tables when she disappeared. Now she spoke like a physicist. "Mom's influence," Emily said with a small smile, as if reading his thoughts. 3 years stuck with a theoretical physicist means you pick things up." "Mom's an archaeologist," Michael corrected automatically. Emily's smile turned sad. "She was, before. Now she's something else, something more." They continued in silence for several minutes, descending deeper into the earth. The air should have grown staler, Michael thought, but instead it seemed increasingly charged with energy, like the atmosphere before a thunderstorm. Finally, they reached what appeared to be a dead end, a smooth wall of solid rock blocking the passage. Emily approached it confidently, placing her palm against its surface. The wall shimmered, becoming translucent, then transparent, revealing a small chamber beyond. "Welcome to our temporary home," Emily said, stepping through the now permeable wall. Michael followed hesitantly, feeling resistance like pushing through thick gelatin before emerging into the chamber. Once inside, he froze, stunned by what he saw. The space was perhaps 20 feet in diameter, roughly circular, with the same crystalline formations illuminating its walls. But unlike the raw cave passages they'd traversed, this chamber had been transformed into a makeshift living space. Bedrolls lay on the floor next to crates that served as tables. Notebooks and strange mechanical devices were scattered about. Maps covered one wall, not of any landscape Michael recognized, but complex multi-dimensional diagrams annotated in his mother's handwriting. And floating in the center of the room was what appeared to be a 3-dimensional projection of swirling lights, like a galaxy or solar system, but with multiple orbits intersecting in impossible ways. "Mom calls it a chronospatial mapping," Emily explained, seeing his fascination with the projection. "It helps us track the convergence points." "Convergence points," Michael repeated, recalling the term from his mother's notes. "What exactly are those?" Emily sighed, dropping her backpack onto one of the bedrolls. "You might want to sit down. It's not easy to explain, and it's even harder to believe." Michael remained standing, unable to take his eyes off the swirling projection. "Try me. The simplest explanation? We're in a place where multiple realities overlap, where the walls between dimensions have worn thin." Emily gestured at the floating lights. "Each of those represents a different timeline, a different version of our universe, and the points where they intersect are convergences, places where you can potentially cross from one to another." Michael shook his head in disbelief. "You're talking about parallel universes?" "Emily, I know how it sounds," she interrupted. "I didn't believe it either at first. But Mom's been studying this phenomenon for years now. Ever since we accidentally stumbled into it, and she's not alone. Those people chasing us? They're from Nexus Research Group. They discovered these convergence points decades ago and have been exploiting them for technology, for power. Michael sank onto one of the bedrolls, suddenly needing to sit after all. So when you and Mom disappeared, we didn't just get lost hiking, Emily confirmed. We found a cave similar to the one you entered today. A natural gateway that only appears when certain conditions are met. We crossed through, not understanding what was happening, and found ourselves elsewhere. Not far in physical space, but in a different version of reality. And you couldn't get back? Emily's expression darkened. It's not that simple. The gateways don't remain stable. They shift, close, reopen elsewhere. Mom's been working to understand the patterns, to predict when and where we could safely cross back to our original timeline. But Nexus found us before we could make it home. What did they want with you? Mom's knowledge, my abilities. Emily looked away, suddenly uncomfortable. It turns out that children who cross through convergence points sometimes develop certain sensitivities to the quantum field. I can feel the fluctuations, sense when gateways are forming. They wanted to use me as a human detector. The casual way she described being exploited sent a chill through Michael. Did they hurt you? Not physically. They're scientists, not monsters. At least not in the way you might think. They kept us comfortable, gave Mom resources for her research. But we were prisoners, valuable assets to be studied and utilized. Her jaw tightened. And they're not the only ones interested in convergence technology. There are other groups from other timelines, all racing to control the gateways. Michael tried to absorb this information, to reconcile the sci-fi narrative with the very real presence of his sister before him. So how did you escape from these Nexus people? Mom created a distraction, a controlled destabilization of one of their research gateways. In the chaos, we fled into the cave system. We've been hiding here for almost 8 months now, using Mom's knowledge and my sensitivity to stay one step ahead of them while she works on a solution. A solution to what? Emily met his gaze directly. To get us all home, of course, to our original timeline. But it's getting harder. The convergence points are becoming more unstable across all realities. Mom thinks it's because of the increased interference. Too many people trying to manipulate the gateways for their own purposes. Michael scrubbed a hand across his face, feeling the grit of desert dust on his skin. It was too much to process, too far beyond his understanding of how reality worked. And yet his sister sat before him, 3 years older than she should have been instead of 11, discussing dimensional physics as casually as she once discussed her favorite cartoons. The pool, he said suddenly, remembering. I saw Mom through it, almost reached her. Emily nodded. That was a partial alignment, a momentary connection between her current location and this one. She's been trying to establish contact to guide you to us. But she's not here with you? Emily's expression fell. No, we got separated during our escape. She's in what we call Echo Lab, a Nexus facility in a neighboring reality. Close but unreachable without proper alignment of the convergence points. She's been working from inside, feeding me information when she can establish brief connections. Like the journal in the car, Michael realized. The drawing you left for me to find. Exactly. Mom figured out how to send small objects through minor convergence points, things that would appear in analogous locations in your timeline. We've been leaving breadcrumbs hoping you'd find them. But why wait 11 years? The question that had been burning inside him finally emerged. It wasn't 11 years for us, Michael. And we did try so many times. But the timelines don't align perfectly. Sometimes a message sent would appear in your past, before we even disappeared. Sometimes they'd manifest years later. Mom's been trying to calculate the temporal drift between our realities, but it's been inexact science at best. She reached into her pocket and withdrew a small, smooth stone that glowed with the same blue-white light as the crystal veins in the cave walls. This helps focus the connections, what Mom calls a resonance key. It's how we found the car's location in your timeline, how we knew you'd be there today. Michael stared at the stone. So what now? How do we get to Mom? How do we all get home? That's where it gets complicated. Emily moved to the wall of maps, pointing to a specific diagram. According to Mom's calculations, there's a major convergence point forming deep in this cave system, one that could potentially connect all 3 locations at once. Where you're from, where I am now, and where Mom is being held. The problem is timing. These convergence points don't stay stable for long, sometimes just minutes. We need to be in exactly the right place at exactly the right moment. And we need Mom on her side to create the resonance that will allow us to cross back to our original timeline. Michael studied the diagram, trying to make sense of the complex mathematics and symbols that surrounded it. And when is this convergence supposed to happen? Tomorrow, Emily said grimly. At precisely 5:17 a.m., according to Mom's calculations. And Nexus knows about it too. That's why they've increased their presence in the caves. They're preparing to capture the energy from the convergence for their own purposes. If they know about it, won't they be expecting us to try something? Emily smiled, a flash of their mother's determination in her expression. Absolutely, but they don't know what Mom's really planning. They think she's helping them stabilize the convergence to allow for controlled travel between dimensions. What she's actually doing is creating a one-time bridge specifically calibrated to our quantum signatures. One that will take us home and then collapse, preventing them from following. Michael ran a hand through his hair, trying to absorb the enormity of what his sister was describing. And you trust that this will work? That Mom has it figured out? I have to, Emily said simply. It's our only chance. The convergence points are becoming increasingly unstable. Mom believes the entire system could collapse within months, making travel between dimensions impossible. Tomorrow might be our last opportunity to get home. She moved to one of the crates and removed what looked like a makeshift radio constructed from mismatched parts. This is how Mom contacts me, a quantum resonance communicator. It only works when the field fluctuations are strong enough, usually just before a minor convergence. As if on cue, the device emitted a series of crackling bursts of static. Emily quickly adjusted several dials, her expression intent. The static resolved into a voice, distorted but recognizable as Sarah Kane. Alignment holding, preparations underway, resonance key activated. Emily, if you can hear me, bring the anchor. Mom, Emily spoke into the device. Mom, Michael is here. He found us. A burst of static then. Michael? How? The temporal drift calculations. Is he all right? I'm fine, Mom, Michael said, leaning toward the device, voice thick with emotion. I've been looking for you both for so long. Thank God, Sarah's voice broke with relief. Listen carefully, we don't have much time. The connection is unstable. Nexus is accelerating their preparations. They've detected unusual quantum signatures in the cave system. They know something's different this time. It's Michael's presence, Emily said, glancing at her brother. He's not supposed to be in this timeline. He's creating additional resonance. Which could work in our favor, Sarah replied, her scientific mind clearly racing despite the emotion in her voice. It could strengthen the bridge, make it more stable for crossing. What do you need us to do? Michael asked. Get to the central chamber by dawn. The map I left, follow it exactly. Avoid the western passages. Nexus has those heavily monitored. Emily knows the route through the crystal gardens. Safer. Signal getting weaker. Mom! Emily adjusted the dials frantically as static overtook the transmission. Mom, are you still there? What? Love you both. Be careful. They've started field destabilization. The transmission cut out entirely, leaving only dead static. Emily switched off the device with a trembling hand. That's it. The alignment has shifted. Will she be all right? Are these Nexus people dangerous? Emily hesitated. They need her expertise. They won't harm her physically, but if they realize what she's planning, she's taking a huge risk. Michael stood, suddenly filled with a fierce determination. After 11 years of searching, he was hours away from potentially reuniting his family. Then we need to be ready. Tell me everything I need to know about getting to this central chamber. Emily nodded, relief evident in her expression. She unfolded a larger map from her pocket and spread it on the floor between them. This is the complete cave system as Mom and I have mapped it. We're here. She pointed to a section near the eastern edge. The central chamber, where the major convergence will form, is here, deep beneath both mesas. The distance looks substantial, at least 5 miles of twisting passages. That's going to take hours to navigate. Which is why we should rest now, Emily said pragmatically. It's almost midnight in this timeline. We need to leave by 3 a.m. to ensure we reach the central chamber with time to prepare. The passages get more dangerous the deeper we go. The crystal formations more unpredictable. Dangerous how? Emily's expression grew solemn. The crystals aren't just pretty lights, Michael. They're physical manifestations of quantum instability. Some areas have what Mom calls temporal eddies, pockets where time flows differently. Step into one unprepared, and you could age years in minutes or be frozen in place while the world moves on around you. Michael swallowed hard. And you know how to avoid these? Usually. I can sense them, remember? That's why Nexus wanted me. But they've been getting stronger, harder to predict. She pointed to a section of the map marked with red symbols. These areas are completely off limits. Temporal rifts so powerful they could tear you apart at the molecular level. The casual way she discussed such existential dangers made Michael's head spin. His little sister had been forced to grow up in a world of quantum physics and interdimensional travel, navigating threats he could barely comprehend. "You should eat something," Emily said, noticing his overwhelmed expression. She passed him a package that resembled military rations. "The food here tastes different, something about subtle atomic variations between realities. But it's nutritious." Michael unwrapped what appeared to be a protein bar, biting into it cautiously. The flavor was indeed off, slightly metallic, with an aftertaste like overripe fruit. But after hours in the desert and caves, he was too hungry to care. "Tell me about your life," Emily said suddenly, her voice softer. "The last 3 years. What happened after we disappeared?" Michael paused mid-bite, the question hitting him harder than expected. How could he summarize 11 years of grief, obsession, and fruitless searching? It was difficult. Dad couldn't handle it. He started drinking, eventually moved to Florida to live with his brother. "We barely speak anymore." Emily's face fell. "I'm sorry. And you? Did you finish school?" "College. I dropped out after 2 years at ASU. Couldn't focus on classes when all I could think about was finding you both." He gave her a sad smile. "Joined search and rescue for a while, thinking it would help me develop skills to find you. Eventually got my PI license, started taking missing persons cases. Been working for a firm in Phoenix the last 3 years." "And you never gave up looking for us? Even after everyone else did?" "Never," Michael said firmly. "Not for a single day." Emily's eyes filled with tears. "I knew you wouldn't. Mom said the same thing, that if anyone could find us, it would be you. She said you were too stubborn to accept we were gone." "Stubborn runs in the family," Michael replied with a faint smile, "as evidenced by the fact that you two have spent 3 years trying to break the laws of physics to get home." Emily laughed, a startling, wonderful sound that momentarily transformed her back into the little sister he remembered. Fair point. As they ate, Emily filled Michael in on the specifics of their journey, how they'd stumbled upon a small cave opening during their hike, how the strange lights inside had drawn them deeper, how they'd suddenly found themselves in what appeared to be the same canyon, but subtly different. "At first we thought we were just lost," she explained. "But then we started noticing things. Plants that weren't quite right, rock formations in the wrong places. And the sky, the stars were arranged differently. That's when Mom realized something truly unusual had happened." "And Nexus found you how?" "They have monitoring equipment throughout the desert in multiple realities. They detected the energy signature when we crossed over and tracked us down within days. They were fascinated by us, especially by Mom's scientific background and her immediate grasp of what had happened." Emily's expression darkened. "They offered her a position, claimed they were researching ways to harness the convergence points for the betterment of humanity." It sounded legitimate at first, but the more access Mom gained to their research, the more she realized they were actually weaponizing the technology, developing ways to invade and conquer parallel timelines that had resources ours had depleted. "And they let a child get involved in this research?" Michael asked, his protective instincts flaring. "Not willingly. But once they realized I could sense the fluctuations, they became insistent on studying me. Mom protected me as best she could, claiming she needed me as a research assistant. She used their interest in my abilities to gain more access, more information, all while planning our escape." The matter-of-fact way Emily described what must have been a terrifying ordeal spoke volumes about the resilience she'd developed. Michael felt a complex mixture of pride in her strength and rage at what she'd been forced to endure. "You said Mom's planning something for tomorrow?" "Something Nexus doesn't expect," Michael prompted. Emily's expression grew animated as she moved to the floating projection in the center of the room. "See these intersecting points? Each represents a different reality connecting momentarily at the convergence point. Nexus wants to harvest the energy from these connections to power their gateway technology. But Mom's discovered something they haven't. That quantum entanglement works across dimensional boundaries if you have a strong enough anchor." She held up the glowing crystal. "Like this. And more importantly, like blood ties. You, me, Mom, we share quantum signatures at the subatomic level. We're naturally entangled in ways their technology can't replicate. Mom believes that if all three of us are present at the right points in the convergence field, we can create a stable enough bridge to cross back to our original timeline. Together. And then what? We just go back to our lives? After everything that's happened? Emily's enthusiasm dimmed. I don't know. How could we? Mom spent the last 3 years studying interdimensional physics. I've grown up in a world of quantum phenomena. We're not the same people who disappeared 11 years ago, just as you're not the same brother we left behind. The painful truth of her words hung between them. Even if they managed to return to their original timeline, there would be no going back to normal. Too much had changed. Too much had been lost. But at least we'd be together, Michael said finally. That's more than I've dared hope for in years. Emily smiled, placing her hand over his. Yes, Together. For a while, they sat in silence, the weight of tomorrow's challenge settling around them. Michael found himself studying his sister's face, cataloging the changes time had wrought. The loss of childish roundness, the new intensity in her eyes, the small scar above her right eyebrow that hadn't been there before. You should get some sleep, Emily said eventually, stifling a yawn. Tomorrow will test us in ways we can't imagine. Michael nodded, exhaustion suddenly crashing over him. The bedroll was thin but comfortable enough for someone who'd spent countless nights staking out locations or sleeping in his car during his search. As he settled in, a thought struck him. Diana, he said, sitting up. My partner. She'll be looking for me. She was heading to the mesas when I last spoke to her. Emily bit her lip. The convergence energy creates a natural barrier around this area. No signals can penetrate it. Your friend won't be able to find you, but she also won't be able to enter the zone of highest instability. She'll be safer outside. She doesn't give up easily, Michael warned. She'll keep searching. Then we'd better succeed tomorrow and get back to her with one hell of an explanation, Emily replied with a half smile. Michael lay back, mind racing despite his exhaustion. Quantum physics, parallel dimensions, temporal rifts. It was madness. And yet his sister sat across from him, solid and real, 3 years older instead of 11. Emily, he whispered, an edge of fear finally creeping into his voice. What if this doesn't work? What if we can't all make it back? In the dim light of the crystal-illuminated chamber, he saw his sister's expression shift to the determined look she'd worn since she was a toddler facing a difficult puzzle. Then we keep trying, she said simply. Just like you did. For 11 years. Michael closed his eyes, letting that stubborn determination wash over him like a protective blanket. Whatever impossible physics they faced tomorrow, whatever dangers Nexus presented, they would face it together. After 11 years of searching, he'd found them. Even if them turned out to be a quantum physicist and a teenage interdimensional navigator, rather than the mother and little sister he'd lost. As sleep began to claim him, Michael felt Emily's hand on his shoulder, a gentle, reassuring touch that bridged timelines and realities, connecting them despite everything that had changed. Rest, she whispered. Tomorrow we bring Mom home. Michael woke to Emily, shaking his shoulder urgently, her expression tense in the blue-white glow of the crystals. We need to move, she whispered. Sunturas, something's happening. The convergence pattern is accelerating. He sat up, instantly alert despite having slept only a few hours. What time is it? Just after 2 a.m. But look. She pointed to the floating projection, where the swirling lights had increased in speed, their intersections more frequent and intense. Mom's calculations must have been off. The energy buildup is happening faster than predicted. Michael grabbed his backpack, quickly checking his supplies. Is that bad? It could be. It might mean the convergence will be more unstable, harder to control. Emily was already stuffing equipment into her own pack, her movements quick and practiced. It also means Nexus will be mobilizing earlier than we expected. As if to confirm her words, a distant rumble vibrated through the cave, sending small showers of dust from the ceiling. What was that? Michael asked, alarmed. Nexus uses sonic resonators to stabilize the tunnels when convergence activity increases. They're setting up their equipment. Emily shouldered her pack. We need to take the eastern route now. It's longer, but should keep us away from their main deployment. She approached the chamber wall, placing her hand against it. The stone solidified, becoming opaque once more, sealing their temporary haven. This way, she said, heading toward a narrow crevice Michael hadn't noticed before. The passage beyond was tight, forcing them to move sideways at points, the crystal formations closer to the walls and dimmer than those in the main tunnels. Emily led confidently, occasionally pausing to consult her map or to close her eyes, sensing something beyond Michael's perception. "How far to the central chamber?" he whispered, the close quarters making normal speech seem too loud. "About 4 miles through these back passages. But distance works strangely near convergence points. Space itself warps and folds." She glanced back, sensing his confusion. "Think of it like walking through a mountain range versus taking a tunnel straight through. The tunnel might be shorter in actual distance, but more dangerous because of potential cave-ins. And we're taking the mountain route?" She nodded. "Safer, but we'll need to be aware of time slippage. There are areas ahead where minutes can stretch or compress. Stay close to me. If we get separated..." She didn't finish the sentence, but her expression conveyed the seriousness clearly enough. Being lost in these tunnels would mean more than just missing their rendezvous. It could mean being trapped in a pocket of warped time or space, potentially forever. They moved in silence for nearly an hour, the passages gradually widening as they descended deeper. The crystal formations grew more elaborate. Not just veins in the walls now, but complex structures that resembled frozen waterfalls or intricate coral reefs, all pulsing with a strange blue-white light. "The crystal gardens," Emily whispered, her voice filled with wonder despite the urgency of their mission. "Mom and I discovered these about 2 months ago. The formations respond to thought patterns. Watch." She closed her eyes, concentrating, and several nearby crystal structures shifted color, taking on a warm golden hue that spread outward like ripples in a pond. "That's incredible," Michael breathed, momentarily forgetting their danger. "They're quantum receivers of some kind. Mom believes they're the physical manifestation of thought patterns from multiple realities overlapping at once." Emily touched one gently, causing it to chime softly, the note hanging in the air unnaturally long. "They helped us map the safer routes. They grow more densely where the temporal fields are stable." They continued through the garden, the beauty of the formations almost hypnotic. Michael found himself wondering if there were any physical laws that remained unbroken in this place, where time flexed, space folded, and crystals responded to thoughts. Emily suddenly halted, throwing out an arm to stop Michael. "Wait, something's wrong." She tilted her head, listening to something he couldn't hear, her expression growing increasingly concerned. "Nexus has changed their deployment pattern. They're in the eastern tunnels too." "How can you tell?" "The crystals? Their resonance has shifted." She pointed to several nearby formations that had taken on a subtle red tinge. "That's their equipment affecting the field." Michael listened intently but heard nothing. "How close?" "Half a mile, maybe less." "And closing." Emily consulted her map frantically. "We need an alternative route." "Could we double back, try another path?" She shook her head. "No time. And the other routes are even more heavily monitored." Her finger traced a faint line on the map that seemed to run straight through a blank area. "There's one possibility, but Mom marked it as potentially unstable." "Potentially unstable sounds better than definitely captured," Michael pointed out. Emily bit her lip, clearly conflicted. "It's a temporal thinning, an area where the barriers between timelines are particularly weak. If we move through quickly enough, we might cross a minor convergence point and emerge closer to the central chamber. And if we don't move quickly enough, we could end up scattered across multiple timelines, our molecular structures separated by dimensional barriers." She said it matter-of-factly, like describing the possibility of getting wet while crossing a stream. Another rumble shook the cave, closer this time, accompanied by the distant sound of mechanical equipment. "I'll take those odds," Michael decided. "Lead the way." Emily nodded grimly, changing direction to head down a narrow side passage that sloped steeply downward. The crystal formations here were different. Instead of the elaborate structures of the garden, these grew in sharp, jagged patterns that seemed to bend and twist in ways that hurt the eyes to follow. "Don't look directly at them," Emily warned. "Temporal distortion can cause sensory overload." Michael focused on his sister's back instead, following her careful footsteps as the passage narrowed further. The temperature dropped noticeably, his breath forming clouds in the increasingly frigid air. "We're approaching the thinning," Emily whispered. "Once we enter, we need to move in a straight line without stopping. Don't touch anything. Don't look back. And keep hold of this." She handed him one end of a length of cord, tying the other around her own wrist. Physical connections help maintain cohesion across temporal shifts. Michael nodded, trying to project a confidence he didn't feel. "Ready when you are." Emily took a deep breath, closed her eyes briefly as if sensing something, then stepped forward into what appeared to be a curtain of shimmering air, like heat waves rising from hot asphalt, but vertical and somehow more substantial. Michael followed and the world went sideways. The sensation was impossible to describe, as if every atom in his body simultaneously existed in multiple places, being pulled in different directions. Colors he had no names for flooded his vision. Sounds overlapped, Emily's breathing, his own heartbeat, voices speaking languages he'd never heard, all played simultaneously like tracks in a mixing studio. They moved forward, or what felt like forward, the cord between them their only anchor to each other and to a shared reality. The passage around them fractured into multiple overlapping versions of itself, some wider, some flooded with water, some crumbling, some smooth and manufactured. And then as suddenly as it had begun, the distortion ended. Michael stumbled forward, nearly colliding with Emily, who had stopped just beyond the shimmering curtain. "Made it," she gasped, her voice shaky. "That was more intense than I expected." Michael braced himself against the wall, fighting a wave of nausea. Is it always like that? No. The coming convergence is affecting everything, making the boundaries more permeable. She looked around, orienting herself. But it worked. We've bypassed almost a mile of tunnels. The passage they now stood in was larger, more structured than the natural caves they'd traversed before. The walls were smoother, with regular patterns of crystals embedded in them like circuit boards. The floor had been leveled, making walking easier. "This is part of the Nexus infrastructure," Emily explained in a whisper. "Maintenance tunnels they built to access the deeper chambers. They're less heavily monitored because they're supposed to be secure, accessible only from their main facility." "So how are we in them?" Emily smiled grimly. "The temporal thinning deposited us inside their security perimeter. They don't understand the cave system as well as they think they do. They moved quickly through the manufactured tunnels, Emily consulting her map less frequently now. The hum of machinery grew louder as they progressed, suggesting they were approaching something significant. "The central convergence chamber should be through there," Emily whispered, pointing to a heavy metal door at the end of the current passage. "But it will be heavily guarded. We need a distraction." Michael studied the door, noting the electronic keypad beside it. "Any ideas?" Before Emily could respond, the distant sound of voices echoed from behind them. Nexus personnel approaching through the tunnels they just traversed. No time for subtlety, Emily decided. She pulled the glowing crystal, the resonance key, from her pocket and approached the keypad. Rather than trying to enter a code, she held the crystal against the device. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The keypad sparked, smoke curling from its circuits, and the door's locking mechanism disengaged with a heavy clunk. Mom discovered that the resonance keys disrupt their technology, Emily explained, pocketing the crystal again. Quantum interference. The voices were growing closer. Michael pushed the door open, and they slipped through into a small antechamber, lined with advanced-looking equipment. Beyond it lay another doorway, this one standing open, revealing a vast cavern beyond, far larger than any they'd encountered so far. The central chamber, Emily breathed, her expression a mixture of awe and determination. We made it. The space beyond was cathedral-like in its dimensions, the ceiling soaring hundreds of feet overhead. But what dominated the chamber was the convergence itself, a swirling vortex of energy that hung suspended in the center of the space, pulsing with all the colors Michael had experienced in the temporal thinning and more besides. Around the edges of the chamber, Nexus personnel in white lab coats worked at banks of equipment, monitoring the growing energy pattern. None had noticed the door opening yet, too focused on their readings and the spectacle before them. There, Emily whispered, pointing to the far side of the chamber. That's where Mom should be. Michael followed her gaze and felt his heart skip. There, working at what appeared to be a central control station, was Sarah Kane. Older, her hair streaked with gray, wearing the same white lab coat as the others, but unmistakably his mother. How do we reach her without being seen? He asked, scanning the room for security personnel. He counted at least 6 armed guards positioned around the perimeter. Emily pointed upward. The observation walkways. If we can access them, we can circle around to Mom's position. The guards are focused on the ground-level entrances. Michael spotted the metal catwalk she indicated, a network of narrow walkways suspended from the ceiling, apparently used for maintaining the equipment mounted high on the chamber walls. There should be access in the maintenance tunnels, Emily continued. If we can find... The door behind them burst open, cutting off her words. They spun to face a squad of Nexus security personnel, weapons raised. Targets acquired, the lead guard reported into a comm unit. Proceeding with capture. Emily reached for her crystal, but another guard was faster, firing what looked like a taser. She dodged, but the movement put her directly in the path of a second guard, who tackled her to the ground. Michael reacted instinctively, driving his shoulder into the man, knocking him away from his sister. Years of PI work had taught him how to handle himself in physical confrontations, but he was outnumbered and outgunned. A third guard fired another taser-like device, and this time the electrodes found their mark. Pain exploded across Michael's nervous system, his muscles seizing uncontrollably. He fell, unable to command his limbs, watching helplessly as Emily fought against her own captors. Emily, Kane, and unidentified male secured, one of the guards reported, bringing them to the containment area. As they were dragged to their feet, Michael locked eyes with his sister. Despite their capture, he saw no fear in her expression, only fierce calculation, as if this were simply another obstacle to overcome. "The resonance key," she mouthed silently, her gaze flicking meaningfully to her pocket. Michael understood. Whatever happened next, they needed to keep that crystal safe. It was their link to Sarah, their way home. As the guards marched them toward a side door, Michael stole one last glance at the massive energy vortex dominating the chamber. It had grown noticeably in just the short time they'd been there, its colors shifting more rapidly, the air around it seeming to bend and warp. The convergence was accelerating. Time was running out, and now they were prisoners of the very organization they'd been fleeing, caught at the threshold of reunion with their mother, with the way home tantalizingly within reach yet impossibly far away. But as the door closed behind them, cutting off his view of the chamber and the swirling energy at its heart, Michael clung to one certainty. They had come too far to fail now. They would find a way. They had to. The containment cell was a triumph of utilitarian design. Seamless white walls, a single bench, no visible door hinges or handles, and a shimmering energy field instead of conventional bars. It reminded Michael of sci-fi prison cells he'd seen in movies, though he doubted most set designers had consulted actual interdimensional research facilities for reference. "Standard Nexus holding protocol," Emily explained, pacing the small space like a caged tiger. "The field disrupts quantum signatures, preventing any convergence manipulation within the cell." Michael sat on the bench, massaging his temples. The effects of the taser-like weapon had mostly faded, but a persistent headache remained. "So we can't use your crystal to escape?" Emily shook her head. "Even if we still had it, no. They took it during processing." Her expression darkened. "Along with everything else useful." Their captors had been thorough, confiscating their backpacks, Emily's makeshift tools, Michael's satellite phone, and even their shoelaces. The resonance key, their link to Sarah and their ticket home, was now in Nexus' hands. "How long until the convergence?" Michael asked, glancing at the featureless ceiling as if it might contain a clock. Hard to say without seeing the energy patterns, but based on how it looked in the chamber. 3 hours? Maybe less. Emily pressed her palm against the invisible barrier, wincing as it repelled her touch with a soft hiss. "Not enough time for Mom to implement her original plan." Michael studied his sister, noting the calculation in her eyes. Despite their dire situation, she didn't seem panicked. Frustrated, yes, but not defeated. "You have an idea." It wasn't a question. He recognized the expression, the same one she'd worn as a child when faced with a particularly challenging puzzle. "Maybe." Emily's voice dropped to a whisper, though there were no obvious monitoring devices in the cell. "Mom always builds in contingencies." She would have anticipated potential capture. Michael leaned forward. "What kind of contingencies?" Before Emily could answer, the energy field at the front of the cell rippled and parted. A man in a pristine lab coat stepped through, the barrier sealing behind him. Tall, white-haired, with keen gray eyes, he carried himself with the confident authority of someone accustomed to deference. "Emily Kane," he said, his voice carrying the faint traces of a European accent. "How disappointing to find you trespassing in restricted areas, and with an unauthorized visitor, no less." Emily's posture stiffened. "Director Weiss, still pretending your research is about scientific advancement rather than dimensional conquest?" The man, Weiss, smiled thinly. "Still clinging to your mother's paranoid conspiracies, I see. A shame. You showed such potential as a quantum resonance detector." He turned his attention to Michael. "And you must be the missing brother. Michael Kane, I presume? The one who's been searching for his family all these years. We've been monitoring your progress for some time. Quite impressive, your persistence." Michael stood, instinctively positioning himself between Weiss and his sister. "You've been watching me?" even in my timeline. Of course, Nexus maintains observation posts across multiple realities. Your mother and sister's unexpected journey presented a unique research opportunity. 3 family members, quantum entangled by blood relation, separated across dimensional barriers. Weiss clasped his hands behind his back, regarding Michael with clinical interest. Your arrival today was a statistical outlier, however. Our models suggested a 13% probability at best. Sorry to mess up your data, Michael replied coldly. Weiss chuckled. On the contrary, your presence is extraordinarily valuable. The quantum resonance created by reuniting all 3 Kane family members will amplify the convergence exponentially. Your mother has been quite cooperative since learning of your approach. Emily tensed beside Michael. What have you done to her? Nothing harmful, I assure you. Dr. Kane is too brilliant to damage. Weiss's expression softened marginally. She's preparing the primary confluence chamber as we speak. The resonance key you carried has already been integrated into the system. Integrated how? Emily demanded. I believe your mother can explain the technical details better than I. Weiss waved his hand, and the energy barrier dissolved completely. 2 armed guards stood at attention in the corridor beyond. She's asked to see you both before the final sequence begins. Michael exchanged a wary glance with Emily. This was too easy, too convenient. Why would you let us see her? Michael asked. Aren't you worried we'll try to escape? Weiss's smile returned, colder than before. Escape to where, Mr. Kane? The convergence is less than 2 hours from critical mass. The pathways between realities are already destabilizing. Without Nexus technology to harness and direct the energy, any attempt to cross dimensions would result in, well, molecular disintegration would be the kindest outcome. He gestured toward the corridor. Besides, your mother's cooperation hinges on your safety and presence. A family reunion seems a small concession to ensure her continued brilliance. Emily moved toward the door, motioning for Michael to follow. He's lying about something, she whispered, barely audible. But this might be our only chance to reach Mom. Michael nodded slightly, eyes never leaving Weiss as they exited the cell. The director's confidence unnerved him. The demeanor of a man who believed he held all the cards. The guards fell into position behind them as Weiss led the way down a sterile corridor, lined with similar containment cells. Most were empty, but Michael glimpsed occupants in a few, figures that weren't always entirely human, at least not in any conventional sense. Some appeared distorted, as if viewed through warped glass. Others seemed to phase in and out of visibility. Other dimensional travelers, Emily explained quietly, noting his disturbed expression. Some voluntary, some not. Nexus collects specimens. Weiss, walking ahead, called back without turning. We provide sanctuary to those displaced by unstable convergence events, Ms. Kane, a distinction your mother once appreciated. They emerged into a large circular room dominated by holographic displays showing complex mathematical equations and 3-dimensional models of what appeared to be the convergence itself. The swirling vortex Michael had glimpsed in the central chamber, but mapped and annotated with data streams. And there at the main control console stood Sarah Kane. Michael froze, his heart hammering against his ribs. 11 years of searching, of hoping against hope, and now just 20 feet separated him from his mother. She looked older, her once dark hair now streaked with silver, her face lined with the weight of her experiences. But her eyes, when she turned and saw them, were exactly as he remembered. Brilliant, determined, and filled with a love so fierce it was almost tangible. Michael, she breathed, her voice catching. My God, you've grown so much. Protocol forgotten, the professional scientist vanished, replaced by a mother who hadn't seen her son in over a decade. Sarah rushed forward, pulling Michael into a tight embrace that nearly crushed the air from his lungs. Mom was all he could manage, his voice thick with emotion. She pulled back just enough to include Emily in the embrace, one arm still firmly around Michael, as if afraid he might disappear if she let go. For a moment, the impossible circumstances of their reunion faded away. They were simply a family, whole again after too long apart, but only for a moment. I hate to interrupt this touching scene, Weiss said, his tone suggesting the opposite, but we're approaching a critical juncture in the convergence cycle. Dr. Kane, perhaps you should explain the situation to your children. Sarah's expression hardened as she released them, though she kept a hand on each of their shoulders. Director Weiss has generously allowed me to brief you on what's happening, she said, her emphasis on generously dripping with sarcasm. The truth is, they need us, all 3 of us, for what comes next. She guided them to the control console, positioning them away from Weiss and the guards. The displays showed the energy vortex growing more turbulent by the minute, bands of color shifting and pulsing at increasing frequencies. The convergence is destabilizing faster than predicted, Sarah explained, her voice low and urgent. The quantum barriers between realities are thinning to dangerous levels. Because of us? Michael asked. Because I crossed over, Sarah nodded. Partly, family members share quantum signatures, entangled at the subatomic level. When you entered this reality, it created a resonance with Emily and me that's accelerating the process. She glanced at the displays. But it's more than that. Nexus has been forcing convergence events for years, harvesting energy and resources from parallel timelines. They've damaged the underlying fabric of reality. And now they can't control it, Emily concluded. Exactly. What you're seeing isn't just a naturally occurring convergence point. It's a cascading system failure. Sarah manipulated one of the displays, bringing up a model that resembled a collapsing web. Every dimension connected to this nexus point is at risk, including our home timeline. Michael felt the weight of her words settle over him. So this isn't just about getting us home anymore. No, it's about preventing a multiversal collapse. Sarah's voice remained calm, despite the enormity of what she described. If the convergence fails catastrophically, the quantum backlash could ripple across dozens of connected realities, affecting billions of people who don't even know other dimensions exist, Emily added grimly. Sarah nodded, which is why Nexus is suddenly so accommodating. They need our combined resonance signatures to stabilize the system long enough to implement a controlled shutdown of the convergence point. Michael glanced toward Weiss, who stood across the room watching them with calculating eyes. And you trust them to do that? After everything they've done? Of course not, Sarah replied with a ghost of a smile. But I've built in safeguards they don't know about, including one triggered by your arrival. She pressed a small object into Michael's palm, a shard of crystal similar to the resonance key Emily had carried, but smaller and cloudy rather than luminescent. Keep this hidden. When I give the signal, place it against any of the crystal formations in the main chamber. Michael closed his fist around the shard, concealing it from view. What will it do? Redirect the quantum pathways. Create a stable bridge back to our timeline while simultaneously collapsing all access points to this nexus from other realities. Sarah glanced at the guards. It won't stop Nexus permanently, but it will set their research back years and seal off their access to our home dimension. And us? Emily asked. Will we make it back? Sarah's expression softened. That's where the family connection becomes crucial. The three of us, together, create a natural resonance pattern that the crystal can lock onto. When the convergence energy peaks, we should be pulled back to our point of origin, our home timeline. Should be? Michael questioned. Interdimensional physics isn't exact science, Sarah admitted. There are variables I can't control, but it's our best chance, maybe our only chance to get home and prevent Nexus from exploiting more realities. Weiss approached, his patience evidently exhausted. Time for family secrets is over, Doctor. Kane, the convergence has reached 70% of critical mass. Your presence is required in the main chamber. Sarah straightened, resuming her professional demeanor. Of course, Director. We're ready. As they were escorted from the control room, Michael caught Emily's eye. The siblings exchanged a silent acknowledgement. Their mother had a plan, one that Nexus knew nothing about. Whether it would work remained to be seen, but it was more hope than they'd had an hour ago. The corridors they traversed now were larger, clearly designed for regular use rather than containment. The walls thrummed with energy, crystal formations pulsing more rapidly as they approached the central chamber. Even the air felt charged, tiny static discharges visible at the edges of Michael's vision. The quantum boundary is thinning, Emily whispered, noticing his reaction to the phenomena. You're seeing bleed-through from other realities. They passed through a massive set of blast doors into the central chamber Michael had glimpsed earlier. Now, however, the space was transformed. The swirling energy vortex had doubled in size, its colors shifting so rapidly they blurred into a blinding white at its core. Equipment along the walls emitted high-pitched whines as technicians frantically adjusted settings, shouting readings to each other across the space. Power fluctuations exceeding safe parameters. Quantum signatures fragmenting in sectors 3 through 7. Dimensional breach imminent in the eastern quadrant. The atmosphere of barely controlled chaos confirmed Sarah's assessment. Nexus was losing control of the convergence they'd helped create. At the center of the chamber, directly beneath the swirling vortex, stood a raised platform surrounded by a circle of tall crystal formations. Unlike the naturally occurring crystals in the cave system, these had been shaped into precise geometric forms that pulsed in synchronized patterns. The resonance amplifier, Sarah explained as they were led toward it, designed to focus and direct the convergence energy. Weiss gestured to the platform. Your positions have been calculated for maximum quantum entanglement. Dr. Kane in the north position, Emily south, and Michael west. As they stepped onto the platform, Michael felt an immediate change, a subtle vibration that seemed to originate not from the floor, but from within his own body, as if his cells were humming in response to the energy around them. The crystal shard in his palm grew warmer. Convergence at 83% and rising, a technician announced from a nearby console. Estimated time to critical mass, 12 minutes. Weiss nodded in satisfaction. Begin the stabilization sequence, Doctor. Kane. Sarah moved to her position, accessing a control panel embedded in the platform. Her fingers flew across the interface, inputting complex commands that caused the crystal formations to shift in color from blue-white to a deep violet. Establishing primary quantum anchor, she reported, her voice steady and professional. Initiating family resonance pattern. As she worked, Michael became aware of a strange sensation, a pulling feeling, as if invisible threads connected him to both Sarah and Emily, growing tauter by the second. The air around them began to shimmer, distorting like a heat mirage. It's working, Emily whispered, wonder in her voice. The quantum entanglement is stabilizing. The vortex above them responded to the changes, its chaotic swirling slowing, patterns emerging within its structure, like the eye of a hurricane forming. The technician's frantic calls became more measured, reporting decreasing fluctuations and stabilizing parameters. Weiss stepped closer to the platform, his expression triumphant. Magnificent. The convergence is responding precisely as theorized. Prepare to channel the energy into the collection arrays. Sarah's hands paused momentarily over the controls. Actually, Director, there's a problem with the quantum alignment. The Kane family resonance is creating an unexpected feedback loop. Alarm flashed across Weiss's face. What kind of feedback loop? This wasn't in your calculations. Blood quantum entanglement is still largely theoretical, Sarah replied calmly. It appears our combined signatures are creating a recursive pattern that's redirecting the convergence energy. As she spoke, the crystal formations surrounding them began to pulse more rapidly, their color shifting again, this time to a brilliant gold. The vortex above mimicked the change, golden streaks appearing within its structure, growing more pronounced by the second. Shut it down, Weiss ordered, true fear entering his voice for the first time. Disengage the resonance amplifier immediately. Sarah's hands resumed their dance across the controls, but not to comply with his command. Takara's are too late, I'm afraid. The process has become self-sustaining. The vibration intensified, the platform beneath them now visibly shimmering as reality itself seemed to warp around them. The crystal formations began to emit a high-pitched tone that rose in volume until it was almost painfully loud. Now, Michael, Sarah shouted over the noise. The crystal! Michael pulled the shard from his palm and lunged toward the nearest formation, pressing the cloudy crystal against its golden surface. The contact created an immediate reaction, a blinding flash of light and a concussive wave of energy that knocked everyone in the chamber off their feet. When Michael's vision cleared, he found himself still on the platform, but the scene around them had changed dramatically. The crystal formations now formed a complete circle of golden light, creating what appeared to be a dome of energy that separated the three Kanes from the rest of the chamber. Outside the dome, Weiss and the Nexus personnel moved as if in slow motion, their shouts silent behind the barrier. Mom, what's happening? Michael asked, his voice sounding strange to his own ears, as if coming from far away. Sarah helped him to his feet, her expression a mixture of triumph and anxiety. We're in a temporal bubble, a pocket of accelerated time created by the redirected convergence energy. It won't last long. Is this your plan? To trap us here? No, this is just the beginning. Sarah pointed upward, where the vortex had transformed into a spiraling golden tunnel that extended upward beyond sight. That's our way home, a stabilized quantum pathway calibrated to our original timeline. Emily joined them, her eyes fixed on the swirling tunnel above. But how do we reach it? It's still 50 feet up. We don't reach it, Sarah explained. It reaches us. The resonance between our quantum signatures is creating a gravitational pull. When the convergence hits critical mass, we'll be drawn into the pathway, Emily finished, understanding dawning on her face, like a tractor beam. Outside their bubble, the Nexus personnel had recovered from the initial shock and were now attempting to breach the energy dome. Weiss directed a team with what appeared to be cutting tools, though their efforts seemed futile against the golden barrier. "How long, Monon?" Michael asked, watching their increasingly desperate attempts. "Seconds in here. Maybe minutes outside, given the temporal differential." Sarah checked a device on her wrist. "The convergence is at 97%. Almost!" Her words were cut off as the platform beneath them gave a violent lurch. The golden dome pulsed brighter, and the three Kanes were suddenly lifted off their feet, suspended in midair as the gravitational pull from above intensified. "Hold on to each other," Sarah shouted over the rising hum of energy around them. "No matter what happens, don't let go." Michael grabbed his mother's hand with his right and Emily's with his left, forming a human chain as they began to rise toward the swirling golden tunnel. Below them, the energy dome shattered, allowing Weiss and his security team onto the platform. But too late. The Kanes were already 20 feet up and accelerating. "Stop them!" Weiss roared, his voice barely audible over the thunderous energy surrounding them. Guards raised weapons, but the director knocked them aside. "No, you'll destabilize the entire system." The last thing Michael saw of the Nexus facility was Weiss's face, contorted with rage and desperation as they ascended beyond reach. Then they were entering the golden tunnel, and reality as he understood it ceased to make sense. The sensation defied description, like being simultaneously stretched and compressed, torn apart and reconstituted, frozen and burning. Colors no human eye was meant to perceive flashed around them. Sounds from dozens of realities overlapped and echoed. For what felt like an eternity and no time at all, Michael existed as pure quantum potential, his only anchors the iron grips of his mother and sister on either side, and then abruptly solid ground. Michael fell to his knees, gasping for breath, still clutching Sarah and Emily's hands with bruising force. Dizziness overwhelmed him as his senses struggled to reorient themselves. Gradually, the world stopped spinning long enough for him to focus on his surroundings. They were in a desert, but not the arid landscape of Arizona caves and research facilities. This was familiar, the exact spot where Michael had found his mother's car just one day earlier. And there it was, the faded blue Chevrolet, partially buried in sand, exactly as he'd left it. "Did it work?" Emily asked weakly, still lying on the ground beside him. "Are we home?" Sarah pushed herself to a sitting position, checking the device on her wrist. The screen was cracked, but still functional. Quantum signatures are stabilizing. Resonance patterns match baseline measurements from our original timeline. She looked up, a tentative smile forming. "I think we made it." Michael stared at the desert around them, searching for any sign of the dimensional instability he'd experienced in the caves. But the air was still, the landscape solid and unchanging. No crystals glowed beneath the surface. No whispers echoed from nowhere. Just the fading light of sunset over the Arizona desert, painting the sky in ordinary, beautiful shades of orange and purple. "Your timeline," he said, the realization hitting him suddenly. "If this is our original reality, then the year is 2025, Sarah confirmed. 11 years since Emily and I disappeared." Her expression softened with sympathy. "I'm so sorry, Michael. We've lost so much time." Emily sat up, looking from her mother to her brother, the full impact of their situation dawning on her face. "Everything will be different. Everyone we knew has moved on without us," Michael finished quietly. "Dad relocated to Florida. Most people gave up the search years ago." A heavy silence fell between them, the bittersweet reality of their homecoming settling in. They were together again, the miracle Michael had spent 11 years praying for. But nothing could restore the decade lost to parallel dimensions and quantum physics. Sarah was the first to rally, her scientist practicality reasserting itself. "We need to confirm our position and timeline. Michael, does your satellite phone still work?" He checked his pockets, surprised to find the device intact after their dimensional journey. "Battery's low, but it's functional." He powered it on, immediately receiving a barrage of missed call notifications. 17 missed calls from Diana. "Looks like the signal's working." "Diana?" Sarah questioned. "My partner at the PI firm. She was heading to the mesas to back me up when I found the car." Michael glanced at the horizon, where the twin mesas were still visible in the distance. "That was yesterday in this timeline, I think." He dialed Diana's number, putting the phone on speaker. It rang twice before a frantic voice answered. Michael? Is that you? Where the hell have you been? I've had search parties combing those mesas for 24 hours. I'm okay, Di, Michael replied, a smile breaking through despite everything. The familiar voice was grounding, a confirmation that they really were home. I'm about 30 miles southwest of the search area, and Diana, I found them. My mom and Emily. They're with me. Silence on the line then. That's not possible. I'll explain everything when I see you. Can you bring vehicles? We're stranded out here with a very old Chevy that probably won't start. More silence, then a shaky breath. I'm tracking your GPS now. Don't move. We'll be there in 40 minutes. The call ended and Michael pocketed the phone, turning back to his family. The reality of what they'd accomplished was still sinking in. After 11 years of searching, after journeying across dimensional barriers and facing down an organization that manipulated reality itself, they were together. Home. What happens now? Emily asked, hugging her knees to her chest. At 14, she was caught between childhood and adulthood, displaced not just across dimensions, but across time as well. Sarah put an arm around her daughter. We rebuild. Together. She looked at Michael. It won't be easy. We'll have to create new identities, explain our absence somehow. Leave that to me, Michael said with newfound confidence. Helping people start over is part of my job these days. As the desert darkness deepened around them, the three Kanes remained huddled together, reluctant to break physical contact after coming so close to permanent separation. Above them, stars emerged, familiar constellations in their correct positions, a cosmic confirmation that they were truly home. Yet even as relief washed over him, Michael couldn't shake a lingering unease. The crystal shard that had been their salvation, the interdimensional doorway, the Nexus organization with its reality-bending technology. It all still existed somewhere in the quantum multiverse. And if Sarah's theories were correct, the boundaries between those realities were growing increasingly unstable. They'll try to find us again, won't they? He asked quietly. Nexus. Once they stabilize their systems. Sarah's expression grew serious. Eventually, yes. The resonance key I created should have sealed off their access to our specific timeline. But quantum barriers can be breached with enough power and determination. Then we need to be ready, Emily said, a new resolve in her voice. We need to understand what we're dealing with. Mom, you could continue your research here, couldn't you? Legally, ethically, Sarah considered this. With the right backing, the right facilities, yes. I've learned enough about convergence points and quantum resonance to make significant advances that could help protect our reality rather than exploit others. Michael nodded slowly, pieces of a new future taking shape in his mind. I have contacts in private security, in technology firms, people who might believe us if we showed them proof. You want to create our own research initiative? Sarah said, understanding dawning in her eyes. A defense system against interdimensional incursion. Someone needs to guard the boundaries, Michael replied simply. And who better than the family that's crossed them? The conversation paused as headlights appeared on the distant horizon. Diana and the search team approaching. Soon they would have to face questions, explanations, the complexity of reintegrating into a world that had continued without them. But in this moment, beneath the stars of their home dimension, the Kanes shared something precious, a new beginning, hard-won across impossible distances. Whatever challenges awaited them, whether scientific, personal, or interdimensional, they would face them together. Family, after all, created the strongest quantum bonds of all. The flashing lights of emergency vehicles illuminated the desert night, casting long shadows across the sand. Michael sat on the tailgate of a search and rescue truck, a blanket draped around his shoulders despite the lingering warmth of the Arizona evening. 20 feet away, medical personnel attended to Sarah and Emily, checking vital signs and asking questions about their physical condition. Diana Chen paced in front of Michael, her expression cycling between relief, confusion, and professional skepticism. She'd listened to his abbreviated explanation without interruption, but her silence afterwards spoke volumes. You don't believe me, Michael said finally. Diana stopped pacing and faced him directly. I want to. God knows I want to, Michael. But parallel dimensions? Quantum physics? Secret research facilities? She ran a hand through her short black hair. It's a lot to process. I know how it sounds. Do you? Because you're talking about your mother and sister living 3 years while 11 passed here. About traveling through time and space. About shadowy organizations manipulating reality. Diana lowered her voice, glancing toward the paramedics. The more likely explanation is that your family has been held captive somewhere very real and very terrestrial, and they've created this narrative to cope with the trauma. Michael had anticipated this response. He reached into his pocket and withdrew the remains of the crystal shard, now dull and cracked after their journey, but still unlike any mineral found on Earth. This was our key home. It's composed of elements not found on the periodic table, Diana. Any lab can confirm that. She took the fragment gingerly, examining it under the truck's floodlights. And you're sure it's not some proprietary compound? Something manufactured? Test it. The atomic structure will defy conventional physics. Diana pocketed the shard with the careful handling of an experienced investigator. I will, but even if this is exotic, it doesn't automatically validate interdimensional travel. Michael sighed, fatigue making it hard to argue persuasively. What about the car? Undisturbed for 11 years in open desert, with no search parties finding it despite grid patterns that should have covered that area dozens of times? This gave Diana pause. As a PI who had worked missing persons cases for years, she understood the thoroughness of standard search protocols. The car's location had indeed been within areas supposedly scoured multiple times. And how do you explain my mother's journal entries dated years after they disappeared? Emily's drawing that showed me as an adult with a PI badge? Time-delayed hoaxes are possible, Diana countered, though with less conviction. Someone could have planted those recently. Who? Why? 11 years later, when most people had given up the search? Michael shook his head. You're reaching for rational explanations because the truth is too incredible. Before Diana could respond, a commotion near the medical vehicles drew their attention. A paramedic was backing away from Emily, whose hands were raised defensively. Sarah stood between them, her posture protective. Michael hurried over, Diana close behind. What's happening? The paramedic, a young man with a bewildered expression, pointed to his electronic blood pressure monitor. It started displaying impossible readings when I tried to check her vitals. Then it shorted out completely. Emily looked to her mother with panic in her eyes. It's happening again. The residual quantum charge. Sarah nodded grimly. We haven't fully stabilized in this reality yet. Our molecular structures are still carrying an energy signature from the convergence point. She addressed the paramedic directly. I'm sorry about your equipment. The effects should diminish over time. The man stared at them, clearly uncertain whether to believe this explanation. I need to report this to my supervisor. Of course, Sarah replied calmly, but perhaps mention a possible electrical discharge rather than quantum physics, for simplicity's sake. Once the paramedic had walked away, Diana stepped closer, her investigator's instincts fully engaged. So electronic devices malfunction around you? That's convenient for avoiding medical tests that might contradict your story. Not all devices, Sarah clarified. Only those that interface directly with our biological systems. Our quantum signatures are still settling into alignment with this reality's baseline frequencies. Diana looked to Michael. And you believe this? I've seen too much not to, he replied simply. A new vehicle approached the scene, an unmarked black SUV that pulled up at the perimeter of the emergency lights. Two men in suits emerged, scanning the area with the unmistakable vigilance of federal agents. Oh no, Sarah murmured, tensing visibly. I was afraid of this. Michael followed her gaze to the newcomers. Who are they? I don't know specifically, but I recognize the type. Government, intelligence, the kind of people who monitor scientific anomalies. Sarah lowered her voice further. In the other timeline, agencies like these worked with Nexus. Sometimes willingly, sometimes under duress. Diana noticed their concern. Friends of yours? Hardly, Sarah replied. Our return would have registered on certain monitoring systems. Residual energy from the convergence, satellite anomalies. We're a statistical impossibility, Ms. Chen. People missing for 11 years don't simply reappear in the desert with impossible minerals and electronics disrupting energy signatures. So what do we do? Michael asked, his protective instincts flaring. Sarah studied the agents, who were now speaking with the search and rescue coordinator. We need time. Time to stabilize fully in this reality. Time to understand what we've brought back with us. Time to prepare for what might follow. We can't do that if we're in government custody being studied like lab specimens. You want to run, Diana stated flatly, after just being found. Not run, Sarah corrected. Strategic retreat. Temporary. Michael could see the conflict on Diana's face, her loyalty to him warring with her respect for legal authorities. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important. But my mother's right. If those agents take them in, we might never see them again. Diana closed her eyes briefly, then sighed. The search coordinator is distracted. There's a service road behind those rocks that connects to Highway 89 about 10 miles north. My car is parked just past the medical vehicles with the keys in the ignition. The decision made, they moved quickly but casually toward Diana's SUV, keeping emergency vehicles between themselves and the agents. Michael helped Emily into the back seat while Sarah claimed the passenger side. Diana held back, handing Michael a small leather case. Burner phones, emergency cash, and a key to my cabin in Flagstaff. It's under my grandmother's name, off the grid. Go there, regroup, figure out your next steps. Her expression was stern. Victory 3 days, Michael. That's how long I can reasonably stall any investigation. After that, I have to tell the truth about helping you leave. 3 days, Michael agreed, gripping her shoulder gratefully. And Diana, thank you. Don't thank me yet. I'm still not entirely convinced you haven't all lost your minds. She managed a tight smile. But 11 years of friendship buys you the benefit of the doubt. With that, she turned back toward the emergency scene, already formulating the story she would tell to explain their absence. Michael slid behind the wheel and started the engine, easing the vehicle away from the lights without turning on the headlights until they were well clear of the area. As they headed north on the service road, the tension in the car was palpable. Emily stared out the window at the starlit desert, her expression unreadable. Sarah studied a map on the dashboard screen, occasionally glancing back at the receding emergency lights. I'm sorry, she said finally. I'd hoped our return could be simpler, that we could just come home. Michael kept his eyes on the rough road ahead. Nothing about the last 11 years has been simple, Mom. Why start now? The attempt at humor fell flat, but it broke some of the tension. Emily leaned forward between the seats. So now we're fugitives? From our own government? Temporarily displaced persons, Sarah corrected. Until we understand the full implications of what's happened to us. What we brought back. Michael met her eyes briefly. You think Nexus has an equivalent in this reality? I think powerful people will have questions about where we've been and what we've experienced. Questions we're not ready to answer. Sarah's voice held the authority of someone who had navigated dangerous waters before. We need to establish our position before engaging with anyone who might seek to control or exploit what we know. They drove in silence for several minutes, the reality of their situation settling over them. The joy of reunion tempered by the complications of return. Does Dad know? Emily asked suddenly, her voice small in the darkness. That we're back? Michael tightened his grip on the steering wheel. Not yet. He's in Florida now. Remarried 3 years ago. The news landed heavily in the car. Another reminder of all that had changed in their absence. He gave up, Emily said, hurt evident in her tone. He grieved, Michael corrected gently. In his own way. We all did. Sarah reached back to squeeze her daughter's hand. We can contact him when it's safe, when we've figured things out. He deserves to know we're alive, whatever his current circumstances. They reached the highway and merged onto it, heading north toward Flagstaff. The sparse traffic paid them no mind. Just another vehicle on a long desert road late at night. For the moment, they were anonymous. Safe. Michael glanced at his mother and sister in the dashboard's dim illumination, still hardly believing they were truly here. After 11 years of searching, of hoping against evidence and reason, his family was reunited. Different, changed by their extraordinary experiences, but together. We should discuss contingencies, Sarah said after a while. The scientist in her already planning, analyzing. The cabin gives us temporary shelter, but we need longer-term solutions. Resources. Allies. I have some contacts, Michael offered. People who might help without asking too many questions. And my PI firm has access to resources for creating new identities. Relocating clients who need to disappear. We're going to need more than new driver's licenses, Sarah replied. We need laboratory access, research facilities, people with expertise in quantum physics and interdimensional theory. Michael raised an eyebrow. That's a pretty specialized resume, Mom. There are people studying these phenomena, even in this timeline. Theoretical physicists, cosmologists. We just need to find them and convince them we're not delusional. She smiled faintly. The crystal fragment should help with that part, at least. Emily had been quiet, but now she spoke up. What about the nexus in this reality? If parallel dimensions exist, then some version of them must exist here too, right? Sarah nodded slowly. Almost certainly. The question is how advanced their research is, and whether they have discovered natural convergence points like the ones we encountered. If they haven't yet, they will, Michael said grimly. And if the boundaries between realities are weakening, as you suggested, then our timeline could face the same dangers, Sarah finished. The same potential for exploitation and damage to the quantum fabric. The implications hung heavy in the air. Their journey home hadn't ended their connection to the extraordinary events they'd experienced. It had only changed the nature of their involvement. Emily leaned forward again. So we're not just hiding, we're preparing. Sarah met her daughter's gaze, a complex mixture of pride and regret in her expression. You should have had a normal childhood. Gone to high school dances, applied to colleges, not become an interdimensional refugee at 14. I think normal was off the table the moment we stepped into that cave 11 years ago. Emily replied with surprising maturity. Besides, how many teenagers can say they've walked between realities and helped save the multiverse? The attempt at levity earned small smiles from both Sarah and Michael. Despite everything, Emily's resilience remained intact. Perhaps the greatest miracle of all. They drove on through the Arizona night, the highway stretching before them like a runway to an uncertain future. The initial euphoria of reunion had given way to sobering reality. They were changed, marked by their experiences in ways that made simple reintegration impossible. Whatever came next would require courage, ingenuity, and the unbreakable bonds of family that had already transcended dimensional barriers. As they approached Flagstaff, the first hints of dawn lightened the eastern sky. A new day in their home reality, the first of many they would face together. Diana Chen's cabin proved to be a well-appointed retreat rather than the rustic shelter Michael had expected. Nestled among ponderosa pines on the outskirts of Flagstaff, it offered both seclusion and modern comforts, including high-speed internet carefully routed through multiple proxies. Your partner comes prepared, Sarah observed as they explored the space. Is there something about her background I should know? Michael smiled faintly. Diana has trust issues with authority. Former FBI analyst who became disillusioned with bureaucracy and politics. She's been helping people navigate system loopholes ever since. And she's your partner? Emily asked, a hint of teenage teasing in her voice. Just professionally? Yes, just professionally, Michael replied, though a slight coloring of his cheeks suggested complications he wasn't elaborating on. Diana's been my most trusted colleague for the past 5 years. She's the only one who never told me to give up searching for you. They settled into the cabin's routine with surprising ease, each finding roles that suited their skills. Sarah commandeered the home office, transforming it into an impromptu research center with multiple computers running complex calculations. Emily, drawing on her experiences navigating dimensional instabilities, proved remarkably adept at cybersecurity, establishing secure communications channels that would have impressed professional hackers. Michael handled the practicalities, supplies, security, and most importantly, developing their next steps. Diana checked in regularly via the encrypted channels Emily had established, providing updates on the official investigation into their disappearance from the desert scene. The feds are definitely interested, she reported during a video call on their second day at the cabin. They've taken over the case from local authorities, citing national security concerns. They've been questioning everyone involved in the search and recovery operation. What about the crystal fragment I gave you? Michael asked. Diana's expression turned grim. It was confiscated, along with all physical evidence collected at the scene. They're calling it material of undetermined origin and potential hazard. Sarah joined the conversation, leaning into the camera's view. Have they released any findings about its composition? Nothing official, but my contact at the lab says it's causing quite the stir. Apparently, it doesn't match any known element or compound. Diana's skepticism had noticeably diminished since their last conversation. They're bringing in specialists from Lawrence Livermore and Los Alamos. Government labs, Sarah murmured. Military applications will be their first priority, which is exactly why we need to proceed carefully, Michael said. Mom, what progress have you made identifying potential allies? Sarah gestured to a digital whiteboard visible behind her, covered in names, institutions, and connecting lines. I've identified 17 theoretical physicists worldwide whose published work suggests they might be receptive to what we know. 3 in particular have proposed theories that align closely with my understanding of interdimensional physics. Any of them within reach? Diana asked. Dr. Elias Vukovic at Caltech, Sarah replied. His papers on quantum entanglement across theoretical membranes are remarkably close to what I observed in practice. And he has no known government or military contracts. Michael made a note. I'll start working on a secure approach. Diana, what's our timeline looking like? You should assume they're actively searching for you now, she replied grimly. They've accessed Sarah's and Emily's dental records, DNA profiles from the original missing persons case, everything they'd need for positive identification if they find you. Then we need to move soon, Michael decided. The longer we stay in one place, the greater the risk. Emily, who had been silent during the exchange, suddenly straightened in her chair. Haha, wait, something's wrong. The adults turned to her, recognizing the focused intensity that came with her quantum sensitivity. Sarah moved first, crossing to her daughter's side. What is it? What do you feel? It's like a vibration, similar to what I felt near convergence points, but fainter. More diffuse. Emily closed her eyes, concentrating. It started about 10 minutes ago, and it's getting stronger. Sarah exchanged a concerned glance with Michael. Residual sensitivity. She can still detect fluctuations in the quantum field. Is that dangerous? Diana asked from the screen. Not directly, but it suggests something is happening. Something significant enough to create ripples we can detect. Sarah turned back to Emily. Can you describe it more specifically? Is it like the Nexus equipment? Natural convergence? Emily shook her head, frustration evident. It's different. Like Acer Santomotimkiush echoes. As if someone is sending out quantum pulses, looking for something. Her eyes flew open, suddenly wide with alarm. Or someone. The implications hit them all simultaneously. Michael was the first to verbalize it. They're scanning for you, using your quantum signatures to track you. Is that possible? Diana demanded. Theoretically, Sarah confirmed, already moving to one of the computers. Our molecular structures still carry traces of the other timeline's frequency patterns. If someone knew what to look for and had sophisticated enough equipment, we need to go. Now, Michael was already gathering essential supplies. Diana, we're abandoning the cabin. I'll contact you through the emergency protocol we established. Wait, Emily interrupted, her expression shifting from alarm to concentration. It's changed. The signal, it's not scanning anymore. It's transmitting, Sarah froze mid-motion. Transmitting what? I don't know. It's like a pattern. Repeating. Emily closed her eyes again, focusing intently. After several tense seconds, she began to murmur numbers in groups of 3. 749, 316, 852. Sarah grabbed a notepad, frantically recording the sequences. When Emily finally opened her eyes, looking drained, Sarah studied the numbers with growing amazement. These aren't random, she said quietly. They're coordinates. Quantum coordinates. For what? Michael asked, pausing in his hasty packing. For a meeting. Sarah looked up, her expression a mixture of caution and wonder. Someone from the other side is reaching out to us. Nexus? Diana asked from the forgotten video call. I don't think so, Sarah replied slowly. Nexus would have used their standard protocols, which Emily would recognize. This is different. More elegant. It could be a trap, Michael warned. Or it could be an ally, Sarah countered. Someone who understands what we've experienced and what might be coming. She tapped the notepad thoughtfully. These coordinates correspond to a location about 60 miles from here. Remote. Isolated. Perfect for an ambush, Michael pointed out. Or perfect for a discreet meeting between parties who don't want official attention, Sarah replied. She studied her son's skeptical expression. Michael, if someone with this level of quantum technology wanted to harm us, they could have done so already. The fact that they're requesting a meeting suggests they want to talk. Or they need us physically present to capture us. We can take precautions, Sarah insisted. Reconnaissance, escape routes, emergency protocols. Michael ran a hand through his hair, conflicted. After 11 years of searching for his family, the thought of risking them in a potential trap was unbearable. But he also recognized the logical force of his mother's argument. If someone had the technology to transmit quantum coordinates directly to Emily's consciousness, they already had significant capabilities. I'll go alone first, he decided. Scout the location, assess the situation. No, Emily and Sarah said in unison. We stay together, Sarah continued firmly. The quantum signature is strongest when we're in proximity. If this is someone who genuinely wants to help, they'll need to examine all 3 of us to understand what's happened. From the computer screen, Diana cleared her throat. Not to interrupt the family debate, but satellite imagery shows increased activity at government facilities within a 100-mile radius of your location. Whatever you decide, you need to decide quickly. The Kanes exchanged looks, a silent family conference. Finally, Michael nodded. We'll check out the coordinates. Together. But at the first sign of trouble, we abort and implement the separation protocol we discussed. Agreed, Sarah said, relief evident in her voice. Diana, we'll need transportation that can't be traced. Already arranged, Diana replied. Storage unit facility in West Flagstaff, Unit 247. Key is under the left rear wheel well of the dumpster behind the office. Gray Toyota hybrid, Arizona plates, registration under one of our clean identities. Full tank, emergency kit in the trunk. Michael smiled despite the tension. Always 3 steps ahead. Someone has to be with you 3 interdimensional fugitives to worry about. Diana's attempt at humor masked genuine concern. Be careful. Check in when you can. And Michael, she hesitated, uncharacteristically emotional. Don't make me search for you for 11 years. We'll be back, he promised, one way or another. After disconnecting the call, they packed with practiced efficiency, only essentials, nothing that couldn't be abandoned if necessary. Within 30 minutes, they had wiped down the cabin, removing all traces of their presence, and loaded their minimal belongings into backpacks. As they prepared to leave, Emily paused in the doorway, looking back at the temporary sanctuary they were abandoning. It never really ends, does it? The running, the uncertainty. Sarah placed a gentle hand on her daughter's shoulder. It ends when we choose to make it end, when we find the right allies, the right knowledge. And in the meantime, Emily asked, suddenly looking very young despite everything she'd experienced. In the meantime, Michael said, joining them at the threshold, we have what matters most, each other. It was a simple truth, perhaps even a cliche, but as they locked the cabin door behind them and headed into the uncertain future, it felt like the only certainty worth clinging to. Whatever awaited them at the mysterious coordinates, whether ally or enemy, opportunity or trap, they would face it as they had faced the impossible journey home. Together, the coordinates led them to a mesa overlooking a vast expanse of Arizona wilderness, eerily similar to where their journey had begun. Michael parked the borrowed Toyota a quarter mile away, hidden among scrub brush and rock formations. They approached on foot, moving with the caution of people who had learned the hard way that reality wasn't always what it seemed. The signal's stronger here, Emily said, her voice hushed in the pre-dawn stillness. Whoever sent those coordinates is close. Sarah consulted a handheld device she'd cobbled together from components purchased at various electronic stores along their route. The quantum fluctuations are centered just ahead, beyond that ridge. They crested the small rise, finding themselves at the edge of a perfectly circular clearing. At its center stood a solitary figure, a woman in her early 60s with short silver hair and a bearing that suggested military training despite her civilian clothes. She was alone, no visible weapons or technology, simply waiting with patient stillness. That's far enough, Michael called, motioning for Sarah and Emily to stay behind him. Identify yourself, the woman smiled slightly. Now, Dr. Elaine Harper, theoretical physicist, former consultant to several agencies I'm no longer at liberty to name. Her gaze moved past Michael to Sarah. And you must be Dr. Sarah Kane. Your work on archaeological dating methods was brilliant, though I suspect your recent research has gone in rather more exotic directions. Sarah stepped forward, ignoring Michael's protective gesture. You sent the quantum signal. How? With technology derived from artifacts similar to the one your son tried to hide from government laboratories. Doctor, Harper gestured to the ground around them. This location sits atop what my team calls a thin spot, a natural weakness in the boundaries between dimensional planes. We've been monitoring it for nearly 20 years. We? Michael questioned sharply. A private research consortium, scientists primarily, who recognize the potential dangers of interdimensional phenomena long before government agencies caught on. Harper focused on Emily now. You can sense it, can't you? The thinness here, the way reality vibrates slightly out of alignment with itself. Emily nodded slowly. It's like what we experienced in the caves, but more subtle. Natural convergence points occur throughout the world, Harper explained. Most are stable, barely detectable without specialized equipment, but some, like the one you encountered 11 years ago, become active periodically. Gateways between parallel realities. Sarah studied Harper with narrowed eyes. Attendez sure, how do you know about our experience? About what happened 11 years ago? Because we were monitoring that convergence point too. Not closely enough, obviously, or we might have prevented your accidental crossing. Genuine regret colored Harper's voice. By the time we detected the energy spike, you were gone. And in the reality you entered, our counterparts were either non-existent or lacked our ethical framework. Nexus, Emily said flatly. Harper's expression darkened. Yes, in some realities, our research collective took a very different path. Exploitation rather than protection. Michael remained skeptical. Convenient story. But you'll forgive us if we don't immediately trust someone who can track us through quantum signatures. I would be disappointed if you did, Harper replied with approval. Caution is appropriate, given what you've experienced. She reached slowly into her jacket pocket, telegraphing her movements to avoid alarm, and withdrew a small crystal similar to the one Sarah had used to bring them home. A resonance key, Sarah breathed. We call them quantum anchors. They stabilize connections between realities, allow for controlled observation without crossing. Harper held it out to Sarah. Examine it. You'll find the crystalline structure matches what you worked with. Sarah took the crystal gingerly. Unlike the cracked, dull fragment they'd used to return home, this one pulsed with steady blue-white light. It's pure, uncorrupted. We've learned to cultivate them, Harper explained, to grow them in controlled environments tuned to specific quantum frequencies. Emily moved closer, drawn to the crystal's gentle glow. It feels familiar, like the ones in the cave, but calmer somehow, because it's in harmony with this reality's baseline frequencies. Harper's gaze moved between the three Kanes, which brings me to why I contacted you. Your family has experienced something unprecedented, successful interdimensional travel and return with minimal quantum degradation. You've brought back knowledge that could be crucial to what's coming. Michael tensed. And what exactly is coming? The same threat you encountered in the other reality. Boundaries between dimensions are weakening across the multiverse. What you experience as isolated convergence points are becoming more frequent, more powerful. Harper's expression grew grave. Your mother's theories about multiversal collapse were correct. The quantum fabric is fraying, and each forced crossing accelerates the degradation. How do you know what theories I developed? Sarah asked sharply. Because fragments of your research made it back to our reality before you did. Quantum echoes, data appearing in our system seemingly from nowhere. It took us years to piece together what they meant, but once we understood, Harper gestured to the mesa around them, we began preparing, establishing monitoring stations at known thin spots, developing technology to detect and potentially repair quantum breaches. And now you want our help, Michael concluded, still wary but increasingly intrigued. We need your first-hand knowledge of how other realities are handling this crisis. And more importantly, Harper focused on Sarah, we need your insights into how to seal breaches permanently. Your quantum bridge technology that brought you home, it's more advanced than anything we've developed. Sarah exchanged glances with Emily and Michael, a wordless family conference. If what you're saying is true, if the boundaries really are weakening globally, then the threat extends beyond just our reality. Billions of lives across countless dimensional planes, Harper confirmed, including those you left behind. Emily stepped forward. You're talking about a multiversal protection initiative, sealing breaches, preventing exploitation, stabilizing the quantum fabric? Precisely. And your family, with your unique experiences and abilities, could be the cornerstone of that effort. Harper's gaze moved to Michael. Even you, Mr. Kane, your search skills led you to find what professional teams with vastly more resources missed for 11 years. That persistence, that intuition for following impossible trails is exactly what we need. And if we decline, Michael asked, testing, then you walk away. Continue running from agencies that will never stop looking for you. Try to build new lives with new identities, always looking over your shoulders. Harper spread her hands. I'm not here to coerce you. I'm offering an opportunity to use what you've learned, to make meaning from your suffering, but the choice is entirely yours. The rising sun crested the distant mountains, casting long shadows across the mesa. In that golden morning light, the three Kanes stood together, facing a decision that would define their future. We need to discuss this privately, Sarah said finally. Harper nodded. Of course. She pointed to a flat rock at the edge of the clearing. I'll wait there. Take all the time you need. As Harper moved away, the Kanes huddled together, speaking in hushed tones. What do you think? Michael asked Sarah. Is she legitimate? The technology is real, Sarah confirmed. That crystal is exactly like the ones I worked with in the Nexus reality, but more refined. And her explanation of the quantum boundaries weakening aligns with everything I observed. I trust her, Emily said simply, surprising both her mother and brother. She feels right. Her quantum signature isn't distorted like the Nexus researchers. Michael raised an eyebrow. You can sense that? Emily nodded. It's gotten stronger since we returned. I think it's because this reality is our natural frequency, so the contrast with anything foreign is more pronounced. Michael studied Harper in the distance, weighing options, potential dangers, opportunities. If we do this, we'd be committing to something potentially as dangerous as what you escaped from. More government agencies, more secret research, more risks. But for the right reasons this time, Sarah pointed out. Protection rather than exploitation. And with people who seem to understand the ethical implications. We'd be choosing to face the danger instead of running from it, Emily added. Isn't that what we've been talking about since we got back? Finding a way to use what happened to us? Michael took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision. Mom, this is your field, your expertise they want. What do you think? Sarah looked toward the horizon, where the sun continued its ascent over the Arizona desert. I think that 11 years ago, we stumbled into something larger than ourselves. Something that affects not just our world, but countless others. She turned back to her children, resolution clear in her eyes. I think we were given a unique perspective for a reason, and I think we have a responsibility to use it. So we say yes, Michael asked. We say yes, Sarah confirmed, but with conditions, transparency, autonomy, and we stay together. Emily smiled, the first genuine smile Michael had seen since their reunion. The Kanes against the multiverse. Again! They walked back to where Harper waited patiently, the quantum anchor crystal glowing softly in her hand. She stood as they approached, her expression carefully neutral. We accept your offer, Sarah said without preamble. With conditions, Harper nodded. I expected nothing less. Name them. Complete transparency about your organization, its funding, its leadership. Access to all research and technology related to dimensional convergence. And most importantly, we remain together, as a family. Non-negotiable. Agreed on all counts, Harper replied without hesitation. Our consortium values ethical boundaries above all else. A lesson learned from observing what happened in other realities when those boundaries were ignored. Michael stepped forward. One more condition. Our friend Diana Chen. She's compromised herself professionally to help us. She needs protection and a place in whatever this is. Harper smiled. Ms. Chen was already on our recruitment list. Her investigative skills and ethical compass have been noted. She'll be contacted today. Then we have a deal, Sarah said, extending her hand. As Harper took it, the quantum anchor between them pulsed brighter for a moment, responding to the proximity of Sarah's unique quantum signature, a reminder of the extraordinary forces they were agreeing to work with and against. Welcome to the Threshold Initiative, Dr. Kane, Harper said, then turned to include Emily and Michael. All of you, you've come full circle in more ways than one. Michael looked at his mother and sister, standing together in the morning sunlight. 11 years of searching, of hoping against hope, had led not to an ending, but to a new beginning. Whatever challenges lay ahead, interdimensional threats, government pursuit, the complex science of quantum realities, they would face them together. They had crossed the impossible divide between worlds to find each other again. Everything else was just details. As they followed Harper toward a concealed research facility built into the mesa, a place of sanctuary and purpose, Michael felt a sense of rightness settle over him. The search that had defined half his life was finally complete. And in finishing one journey, they were beginning another, one that stretched across dimensions, across realities, across the very fabric of existence itself. The Kane family was whole again, and the multiverse would never be quite the same.